Hi, I'm Cressel Anderson, this is Makercise. In this episode, I make some tables, but not only do I make tables, I'm going to show you the real benefit of Fusion 360, which is its parametric modeling capabilities. The model that I developed is flexible in the sense that the user can specify the dimensions and the model updates accordingly. This means that for a single style of table, you only need to design one model. Then you can update the parameters to get the functionality and look that you're going for. And if you're interested in the model, I'll have a link down in the description below.
In this project, as in most woodworking projects, the process starts with breaking down the raw materials. In this case, the material I was using for the table legs and rails is poplar that I milled from a friend's tree. He took out this poplar in his front yard about 2 years ago, and I let it dry in my basement until it was ready for this project. I have a link to that video down in the description and in the cards if you're interested. To process this material, I first ripped it on the table saw, jointed two faces, cut it to width on the table saw, and then planed it to dimension. Then for the legs, I had to glue up several pieces of wood to make a thick enough piece of stock for the legs. I glued up these pieces off camera, and after they dried, I jointed two faces. Then I planed the legs down to their finished size. Then I cut the legs to length using my crosscut sled. I laid out the locations and then used my router table to cut the mortises into the legs. I used another crosscut sled with a dado stack to form the tenons on the rails. To make the tenon fit snugly, I fine-tuned it using a block plane and a chisel. One of the desks that I decided to build according to this parametric model was a standing desk, and this is the desk that I use for most of my video editing and computer work. I wanted to check to verify that the height was a comfortable height for me when I was working, so I mocked it up. I used a ratchet strap to hold all the legs and rails together while I confirmed the height. With the height of the standing desk confirmed, I switched my attention to cutting tapers on the legs. And these tapers are a little bit funny because you have to be aware of the order in which you cut them. I went ahead and gave it a little bit of a chamfer on all the edges just to knock down the sharp corners of the legs. I used some wood filler to fill in a few knots on the surface of the wood. These bases will be painted. And then I got started gluing up the smaller tables. I left the larger table unglued until later in the project. Cutting the tapers on the legs for the standing desk was a rather precarious operation. Those long legs, just the taper jig that I have isn't made for such a long taper. If you have any ideas about, a better way to make those long tapered cuts like that, let me know in the comments below. I sanded the parts for the standing desk as well as the assembled smaller desks, and I got started applying a coat of paint. And I just used some exterior grade latex paint that I had on hand. AABB. And now I gotta flip the whole thing over. I used letters as a labeling system so I could track which parts went where, flipped them over, applied glue, and then assembled the table using a strap clamp to keep everything held in place. I did check the table for squareness by measuring diagonally across the legs. I flipped the base over and then applied one last coat, especially around those areas where I had glued. I really love Fusion 360 because in addition to tools like sectional analysis, I can actually take my tablet into the shop and use it to grab measurements during the project. If you think you want to learn Fusion 360, I recommend Mike Moyer's course, Fusion 360 for woodworkers and hobbyists, and I even have a discount code down in the description. The next thing I did was turn my attention to the tabletops, and I used 3/4 inch sheets of red oak plywood to make the tops for all 3 of these tables. After I had them roughly cut to dimension, I squared up one end of the tabletop with my table saw sled, marked it to length, flipped the part, and then I cut the other end to length. Using my extended height table saw fence and a dado blade, I cut grooves around the perimeter of the tabletops. I also cut tenons on oak boards that will form the edge banding for the tabletops. I ripped the edge banding from the oak boards that they came from, and then I cut them to length on my table saw sled. I cut notches in the end of the edge banding so that they wouldn't interfere with the adjacent pieces of edge banding. Then I glued it all up and clamped it into place. For the standing desk, it was longer than my longest clamp in the shop, so I had to use ratchet straps to secure the edge banding into place while the glue dried. I made the edge banding a little bit taller than the tabletops, and then I came back with a block plane to knock down that edge and make it a flush surface. To blend it even more, I did a little bit of sanding off camera, then I moved on to finishing. To select my finish, I browsed the finish aisle and tried a lot of different finishes to see what looked best on the red oak I was using for the tabletops. My biggest recommendation is to test your finish. Follow the manufacturer's instructions for application and see what works best for you. In this case, I used a wood stain followed by a water-based polyurethane. And I'm super happy with the results. After finishing the tabletops, I turned my attention to fabricating the brackets that attach the tabletops to the table bases. I just used some scrap aluminum to make these brackets. I used my table saw sled to cut short segments, and then I used a drill bit with a countersink to make holes in either end. I scribed an outline of these brackets on top of the table legs and used my router to route out the mortise for the brackets. Then I used screws to attach the brackets to the tops of the table legs. I flipped both the table tops and the table bases over so that I could screw these brackets into the underside of the tabletops. This way there's a good connection between the tabletop and the table bases. I've had these tables finished for a while, and I really love my standing desk especially, but I'm really happy with how the project turned out overall, and I hope this project builds your confidence to exercise your inner maker. Thanks for watching.